This video is brought to you by Nebula. Earlier this month, at the African Cup of Nations semi-final, the Congolese football team covered their mouths and put two fingers, like a gun, to their temples, in a protest against violence in their country, and the world's apparent lack of interest. A resurgence of violence in the Eastern Democratic Republic of the Congo is the latest event in a long-running series of conflicts going back decades, which has created one of the most complex and longest humanitarian crises in the world. But with the eyes of the world largely focused on other conflicts like those in Gaza and Ukraine, the DRC receives relatively little attention, even as anti-Western protests break out in the country, and rebel groups fight to gain more ground and control of valuable natural resources. So in this video, we're going to take a look at what's going on in the DRC, explaining the crisis and its key players, its significance, and more. Before we start, if you haven't already, please consider subscribing and ringing the bell to stay in the loop and be notified when we release new videos. The Democratic Republic of the Congo is extraordinarily rich in natural resources, but this has so far resulted in exploitation rather than wealth for regular Congolese people. In the late 19th and early 20th century, it was the extraction of the state's ivory and rubber that created immense wealth for Europeans, particularly the King of Belgium, while having a catastrophic impact on the native population. During the Second World War, uranium from the Belgian Congo was used by the United States to build the world's first atomic bombs. Post-Congolese independence in 1960, lucrative copper and other mining operations in the country's south contributed to Katanga province's Belgian-backed secession attempt, which formed part of the wider Congo crisis. And today, the rich deposits of things like tin, gold and coltan in the Eastern DRC play a key role in the conflicts that continue to afflict the region. The Eastern DRC has been plagued by violence by various armed groups for nearly 3 decades. The region also sits right along the DRC's eastern border, next to Uganda, Rwanda and Burundi, with Rwanda in particular having played, and still playing, an outsized role in the DRC's history. Perhaps the most prominent armed non-state group in the Eastern DRC is the March the 23rd movement, known as M23, which is predominantly made up of ethnic Tutsis. The group's name refers to the date in 2009 that the DRC government signed a peace agreement to end a previous Tutsi-led rebellion. Years later, in 2012, M23 launched a new rebellion, accusing the DRC government of failing to uphold the previous agreement. The group captured swathes of territory and even took control of Goma, the capital of North Kivu, before the revolt was eventually put down by the Congolese army and UN forces, who drove M23 out of the country. But a decade later, in 2022, M23 re-emerged with a major new offensive, which has yet again further destabilised the volatile region, prompting military interventions and mediation efforts by the East African Community and Southern African Development Community. Nevertheless, brokered ceasefires haven't really held, and fighting has flared again since the beginning of this year. It appears that M23 is now aiming to capture the strategic town of Sake, which is just 25 kilometers northwest of Goma, home to nearly 2 million people. This has led to fears that the group once again has its sights set on taking Goma. The key thing to know about the group is that while it's a non-state group, it is supported by the Rwandan government, a factor that has contributed to a great deal of tension between the DRC and Rwanda, despite denials by Rwanda. UN experts have cited solid evidence of Rwandan support for M23, not just logistical support, but also the supplying of arms and, at times, the sending of troops to fight alongside the rebels. It was even reported this month that M23 rebels had fired a suspected Rwandan army surface-to-air missile at a UN observation drone. A UN expert's report from last year stated that the Rwandan military's aim in the DRC was to reinforce M23 by providing troops and material, and to use them to secure control over mine sites, gain political influence in the DRC, and decimate the FDLR. The FDLR, by the way, is an anti-Rwandan government rebel group active in the Eastern DRC, with alleged support from the Congolese government, and are considered M23's main rival. The group is dominated by ethnic Hutus, many of whom fled Rwanda for the DRC after carrying out the 1994 Rwandan genocide against the Tutsi population. The genocide preceded the First and Second Congo Wars, which engulfed the DRC between 1996 and 2003, resulting in the deaths of millions and millions of people, and the involvement of troops from more than half a dozen African countries, with the reverberations still being felt to this day. Rwanda's support for M23 has helped spark anti-Western protests in the DRC, due to the generally warm relations that the Rwandan government has with the West. Protesters in the DRC's capital Kinshasa recently gathered outside the American, French and other Western embassies, plus the UN mission headquarters, where they burned tyres and flags. The failure of the more than 2-decade-long UN peacekeeping mission to stabilise the region has also contributed to the anger among the local population, and following a request from the Congolese government, the UN mission will leave the country by the end of 2024. Adding to the complex picture in the region are a whole load of other groups, more than 100 in fact, that operate in the Eastern DRC. Some other prominent ones besides M23 and the FDLR are the Islamic State-linked Allied Democratic Forces, or ADF, and the predominantly ethnically Lendu Codeco group. Within this multifaceted conflict, the various armed groups have committed horrendous acts. Massacres, sexual violence, the use of child soldiers, and more. The conflict in the region has had dire humanitarian consequences. According to Save the Children, at least 150,000 people have been displaced since February the 2nd, on top of the 1 million that were displaced in the Eastern DRC through 2023, which in turn formed just a fraction of the roughly 7 million internally displaced people across the entire country. The situation in and around Goma, which is swelling with refugees from the surrounding area, is particularly troubling, as fighting and road blockages prevent the entry and exit of vital supplies. With the drawing down of the UN's mission, the pressure is now on the Southern African Development Community's newly deployed force to help the DRC in finally establishing lasting peace and stability, things that have proven incredibly elusive over the past decades. There's no single reason why the conflict in the DRC receives less attention than, say, Gaza or Ukraine. For many of us, it's more geographically distant, and for some, it may feel less geopolitically significant. But the scale of the humanitarian situation, the international and geopolitical angle, and the fact that the device you're watching this on may well be powered by Congolese materials means it deserves far more attention than the rest of the world currently gives it.
As a TLDR viewer, I can pretty confidently say that you're curious about the world around you. Keen to know what's really going on, rather than just the general media narrative. And one country where this is particularly interesting is China, where a lot of media coverage can be muddled or misleading. If you want to dive deeper though, I'd recommend Polymatter's incredible series, China Actually, which explores the truth behind the Chinese news, examining the truth about China's one-child policy, why China has no allies, how Chinese censorship really works, and what exactly China's nuclear policy looks like. All in all, it's a brilliantly researched and thoughtful series, and it's exclusively available on our streaming service, Nebula. As you know, Nebula is the service that we built with a whole bunch of our creator friends, and is home to tons of smart, educational content from all of your favorite creators. The best part is that by signing up, you not only get exclusive series like China Actually, modern conflicts from Real Life Law, or the logistics of X from Wendover Productions. It also includes all of our content totally ad-free, and sometimes before it arrives on YouTube. Plus, signing up directly supports TLDR, because by doing so, you contribute to the budgets of these big budget documentaries and help us to grow and expand our ambitions. So if you want to get more superb content and support TLDR, then if you sign up using the link below, you can support us directly and get Nebula for 40% off an annual plan. That's about £2 a month. Thanks for your support and for backing Nebula.